Hi, I'm Hannah. This is Theology Therapist. Thanks so much for being here. Today I wanted to talk to you about one form of treatment for trauma. So if you have ever been diagnosed with PTSD, there is a therapy called cognitive processing therapy, and it is a branch of cognitive therapy, but it has been specifically designed for trauma and for the treatment of PTSD. This means that the primary focus of treatment is how the trauma or the event itself has been integrated into someone's worldview and essentially their beliefs about themselves, others, the world, etc. I want to give you a rundown of a few things that make CPT, cognitive processing therapy, a little bit different than other trauma modalities. So, first thing, CPT is a manualized treatment. That means that there are specific objectives laid out for each session and goals for us to meet or to cover that session. So if you have never heard of a manualized treatment, you may not know what that means or what that would look like in practice. What you may be used to is talk therapy, where you sit, you talk. So all of those stereotypes about psychotherapists of like, tell me about how you feel. How does that make you feel? Oh, let's look at that dream that you had, right? Like those things, those are one form that happens in talk therapy. Those do not happen in CPT. CPT is way less what I would call fluffy than regular talk therapy. So I don't begin sessions with, how is your week? Normally when I meet with a client and we're meeting in a talk therapy style or like just a different kind of like therapy modality, let's start with, how was your week, right? What happened? So we can process through that. But in CPT, that is not how we start. What we start with was, how was your practice work this week? So manualized therapy can feel really strange and stiff at first if what you're used to is the sort of flexibility and the formlessness of talk therapy. I sort of think of it like yoga. In yoga, we use props to support yourself in poses, right? If I was trying to get into splits myself without any props, I am likely going to be gripping and tense, like the splits is not a fun pose. It's really uncomfortable. Painful, right? So if I'm trying to do that by myself and my body is not ready to do that, we're not going anywhere, right? Because it's going to stop me. I'm going to be tense. My body is going to prevent me from going any deeper. But if I use props and I try to go into splits, what may happen, if I have my blocks on the side, maybe I put a blanket or a bolster underneath my hips, what might happen is after a few minutes, I may notice that I can go a little deeper. Maybe I can flip the blocks down and go on to a lower height, right? Or maybe my legs can inch back and forth a little bit further, right? And that is only because the support of the blocks and the other props that we have provide enough structure that my body isn't gripping, it's not tense, and it feels safe enough to relax into this pose. My body feels safe enough to go deeper. This is what working with a manualized treatment is like. It is like having props and blocks in yoga. Another aspect of CPT that differentiates it from a lot of other trauma treatments is that it is time-bound. CPT happens on an average of 12 sessions. There is the possibility to add or subtract sessions if there are additional areas of need that need to be addressed once we've achieved all those objectives, like I was mentioning. At the end, if there's still like an area or something that we haven't addressed, it would be serviced. It would be of benefit to you to spend an extra week or extra few weeks in session specifically addressing those things. There is the flexibility to add those on once that primary treatment has been completed. So there can be a sort of supplemental treatment. In some rare cases, although this doesn't happen as much, but does happen, where treatment can even be shortened from the 12 sessions once a client no longer meets criteria for PTSD. And so if that happens on a consistent basis, then there might be a discussion about whether treatment is still necessary. CPT can also happen intensively. So the client can choose to meet once per week, like a typical therapy, or they can choose to shorten the duration by meeting twice a week or even in very intensive fashion program, meeting once a day for 2 weeks. Okay. Now, the only thing is that the opposite could not be true. So research has shown that CPT isn't effective if you meet less frequently than 1 week. The effects of those skills-based practices and the treatment itself start to drop off. So if you are interested to do this over a span of 3 months, and you are financially able to support an intensive program, that can be a really great option. One of the barriers of a more intensive program is usually cost prohibitive, in that the sessions happen in that shorter duration, like we were talking about, so that payment generally has to happen in that time as well. So that tends to be the biggest barrier to doing something like that, and needing to have the time in those 2 weeks to devote to every single day working on those skills that we're talking about. Okay, the third differentiator is that CPT is measurable. What? How could it be measurable when we're talking about like psychology and, you know, how I feel? And CPT is measurable because before each session, before even the start of treatment, you'll take a quiz, basically. And you're gonna get a score on that quiz. And that first quiz that you take before you even begin treatment, that's gonna be that baseline score. And then you're gonna do that again before you come to each session. What happens is that over time, we have an actual reference for how symptoms are changing. What happens a lot of time is someone might come in with a score of, 65, right? That might be their baseline score. And then throughout treatment, we might see that score 65, 63, 55, and go. We might have a week where, life happened, or they had a really sucky day at work, or a fight with their kids or their partner or whoever. And so then we might have dropped down to like 40, and then we might spike back up to, we'll say 53. And then by over time and throughout the 12 sessions and the treatment, what we see is little by little, those symptoms go down. So then what we have is, like I was saying, sometimes there can be a spike because life continues to happen in your life, even though you're in, or while you're in CPT treatment for trauma. And that week I might say, how was your practice work this week? And you might just say, it was rough because, I had a fight with the kids and I didn't get the promotion, whatever. And so then we talk about that in the context of practice, in the context of the objectives that we are working through. And so what also happens is as we're going throughout treatment, sometimes we might see that score is kind of holding steady, right? It's not exactly dropping like we want it to. And so we can go back and we can look at this quiz that you've been taking, and we can see the areas that are still getting scored higher. And then we can take a deeper look at those areas. Oh, you're still having a startle response. Like you're still feeling hypersensitive to noises. Talk to me about that. What is going on there, right? Okay, let's do a ABC worksheet. Let's do CBW on those. You don't need to know those acronyms. Those are CPT things. So that is the third differentiator in CPT from other treatments. The fourth, I would say, is that it's extremely collaborative. So the goal of CPT is to teach clients skills that they need to essentially become their own therapist. In the beginning, you have the guidance of a clinician, which is fundamental. But over time, the dynamic begins to shift, and the client really starts to lead sessions as they learn the skills and start to feel more and more comfortable in those skills to evaluate their own beliefs. So it's also collaborative in the way that it becomes clear not only for the clinician, like I was just talking about with regards to score and referencing, but also to the client, the areas that continue to cause difficulty that come up in your day-to-day life. So this type of therapy is very collaborative because it's not me, the clinician, saying this is what the problem is, but it's the client actually taking ownership of that and is asked to describe more about their perspective or experience of what symptoms are like throughout the week. And then they're encouraged and really supported in taking the skills that they've learned through CPT and the positive coping skills in order to evaluate what the situation, the thoughts that happen, those feelings that occur in that day-to-day experience. So this is the fifth and the last differentiator that I would say is a primary difference between CPT and other trauma treatments. CPT is very direct, and specifically it's very direct in addressing avoidance. So avoidance, like we talked about last week, so if you haven't watched last week's episode on PTSD and trauma, go back and watch it now. You can pause this, come back to it. But avoidance is the primary factor in sustaining PTSD symptoms. Therefore, it is crucial at the beginning of treatment that the clinician and the client make an agreement to address avoidance head on when it happens. This means that we also expect it to happen. We know that avoidance is going to happen because it is a primary symptom of PTSD. So when it does come up, it's not something to be ashamed about. It's not something that we're talking about within the context of shame. We're not saying, how could you not do your homework? How could you not, don't you get it? You have to be doing this and not. No, we know that avoidance happens. And so it's not something that, we're piling on the guilt and that you are bad for not doing this, because we understand that it's an aspect of the face of PTSD and how that presents. So one of the most important things for us to do when it comes up early on in treatment is to discover and identify what are the pros, what are the positive side effects that you are getting from avoiding whatever the thing is. And you might think, nothing, I'm just like a mess and it's not helping me. I get that, but also avoidance does help. There's a lot, there's a lot of ways in which it benefits us. That's why we do it, right? So we're gonna spend some time thinking first, what are those positive aspects that you are getting from the avoidance, okay? Because there ain't no shame here. Most of the time, avoidance can be worked through. On rare occasions, for whatever the reason, when someone continues in avoidance of the practice work, of out-of-session work, for example, the clinician, after having had conversations and trying to work through challenges, if someone is continuing in avoidance, treatment may be discontinued, but the client will be encouraged to come back and to re-engage in treatment in the future whenever it's possible to address those avoidance symptoms. So it does happen. It does happen. Sometimes life really gets in the way, right? Like maybe you're a student and you're in the middle of your semester and you are working at the same time, and honestly, you really just don't have the capacity to work, to get all your assignments done, and to do the out-of-session work. That doesn't mean that you're bad. That doesn't have that meaning, right? That we may think that you don't want it, but it's not going to be effective for us to continue in CPT at that point. And so what will be more effective is for us to discontinue treatment after we've talked about, try to work through challenges. It's still avoidance. It is going to be much more effective for us to discontinue, and then for you to come back in the future whenever it is or will be possible for you to re-engage and address that avoidance. The clients that I've worked with CPT have seen dramatic changes. Their hair started growing back. They gained weight when they were underweight. They hadn't had a panic attack in more than a month. They were no longer avoiding social engagements or work responsibilities. They were able to discuss the traumatic event without undue distress. And they've even been able to return to the scene of the traumatic event or interact with the perpetrator and use positive coping skills to calm and manage and address arousal symptoms and any of those symptoms that might come up from being in that situation. They were able to use the skills that they learned in CPT and positive coping skills like breathing exercises, grounding exercises in order to manage that and to get them through that situation. and to allow them to be there. There's loads of research about CPT. It was initially utilized and introduced at the VA, and it has been shown to be particularly effective with people who have experienced sexual assault and veterans. Since it is a cognitive or language-heavy program, there are accommodations that can be made for cognitive limitations or language limitations, including having a TBI, traumatic brain injury, or having English as a second language. So if you are seeking treatment with CPT and you need an accommodation to be made, the treatment has been researched in order to make treatment effective with these accommodations. If you would like to learn more about CPT, you can visit their website at cpt4ptsd.com. On the website, you can watch a short info video about what treatment is like, and you can also search for a list of approved providers in your area. If you like podcasts, This American Life did a podcast. They did an episode where they followed one of their journalists around who actually received PTSD treatment through an intensive 2-week CPT program. So we'll link both of these in the description. If you are in Massachusetts and you would like to schedule an initial consult for CPT or trauma treatment, there will be a link in the description as well. I'd be happy to meet you. Folks, it was good to talk to you today, and leave a comment below and let me know what you thought about this, if you've ever heard of CPT, and how you think that it might differentiate from some of the other trauma treatments that you've heard about. Be well, friends.